I've been wanting to make a video on the Elvis Merzlikins situation with Columbus for a while now, but the more I looked into this situation, the more this just felt like more of the same from this front office, where they've been getting themselves into mess after mess for the last couple of years. And so I just kind of wanted to sort of catalog some things that I think were significant about this front office and how they keep getting themselves into avoidable situations, and that's kind of mistakes compounding on mistakes, cataloging them here and my thoughts on those. And by the way, this is probably going to be longer than most videos that I upload, and I probably won't even cover all of the bad moves they make. Like, I don't plan on getting into any of like the contracts that I don't like that they've signed, like the Severson deal, which has a huge term attached to it, Eric and Branson getting a 4x4 contract. Like, I mentioned those now, but I'm not going to deep dive into those deals or anything. But I feel like we can kind of walk all the way back to when John Tortorella left the head coaching job for the Blue Jackets, which I don't think that was a bad move from the front office. It was clear that John Tortorella didn't really want to coach in Columbus anymore, where the veteran group had to convince him to stay for one more year, and then those guys were traded off during that trade deadline for tools to help the rebuild. So that was fine. Torts leaves, and I didn't want to be here, so that left a coaching search for the 2021-22 season, where you had guys like Gerard Gallant was out there and Rick Tocchet was available. But instead, the Blue Jackets landed Brad Larsen, which was a move that was pretty much immediately lambasted by the Blue Jackets fan base, where honestly, it felt like the team needed a bit of a new, refreshing voice. So to have an assistant coach from John Tortorella's tenure rang a little bit disappointing to a lot of us in the fan base. And honestly, if you wanted to hire an old assistant coach, there was the guy who coached the more efficient unit in the defense was also there. His name was also Brad. It felt like maybe they got the wrong Brad and shuffled the paperwork a little bit too much. But honestly, if I'm honest, the first year of Brad Larsen's head coaching gig with the Blue Jackets went a lot better than expected. They got off to a hot start, and yes, the season ultimately didn't go anywhere. They weren't really a threat to make the postseason or anything, but they were expected to be like a bottom 5, bottom 3 team in the league, and they ended up picking 12th in the draft, which was where they fell in their position for their draft pick. They also drafted 6th overall because of the Seth Jones trade. They got Chicago's first-round pick. That 6th overall was where Chicago landed. The Jackets actually did a lot better than many were expecting, even if it wasn't an overall good season for them. So that led to the second year of Brad Larsen, where it felt like, okay, maybe the Blue Jackets take another step forward. Maybe they get a little bit closer to that playoff line. Instead, they just come out of training camp, obviously not ready for a bit of a tougher opening schedule than they had the previous year. And then once they got off to the bad start, that's when all the injuries started piling up. And then it was clear that Brad Larsen, he's not the kind of head coach at this point in his career where he's going to be getting more from the sum of his parts than he has. So that's what led to last season and that awful situation that led to the Jackets picking third and eventually landing Adam Fantilli. But before that, it was clear that Brad Larsen was a must fire in order for anything to move forward for this organization. I think Jarmo described his firing as absolutely necessary, which is code speak for like, hey, this guy sucked and we really needed to get him out of the building as soon as possible. So last offseason, the Blue Jackets said they wanted to conduct this coaching search fairly quickly after the lottery was decided. And there were some candidates that were given interviews before they really started to narrow things down on the search. Peter Laviolette was out there. Patrick Waugh was a bit of an interesting name. Obviously, he's been recently hired by the Islanders. He was heavily linked to Columbus in the offseason, pretty much more than he was with anyone else, it seemed, by a large margin back before the season started. But there was one name that was interviewed that set the hockey world on alert, and that would be Mike Babcock. And after a bit of a quiet period in a weird time where the Blue Jackets coaching search was kind of quiet after they said they wanted to kind of hustle on this and get things done, it would eventually be discovered that Mike Babcock was the hire once his contract with the Maple Leafs ran out, which is a bit of an interesting foreshadowing where literally before he's even hired, there are some complicated hiccups with Mike Babcock where they had to wait until his contract with the Maple Leafs ran out before they could even really acknowledge that he was going to be their head coach, because they couldn't agree on like terms for a buyout. So they just kind of had to keep things quiet and hush-hush and keep everything kind of as an innuendo, where they couldn't officially announce that Mike Babcock was hired when pretty much everyone else knew that Mike Babcock was going to be hired by the Blue Jackets. So then Babcock comes in. Obviously, there's a lot of media media, I guess, scrutiny and criticism of the move, and it turns out that would be rightfully so, as not even before training camp began, an incident with Mike Babcock leaked out on the Spit and Chicklets podcast about, him looking through players' phones without necessarily having, the proper decorum about it, right? Just kind of snatching guys' phones and looking through their pictures, which, yeah, that seemed like it would be a bit of an invasion of privacy and maybe treating some of the younger, more unproven players a bit differently than he was treating some of the more veteran, established players on the roster. And obviously, with the NHLPA getting involved, eventually, Mike Babcock technically resigns, but I'm pretty sure he was told to go away, and Mike Babcock it was either he resigned or he was unceremoniously fired, and Mike Babcock agreed to just resign. That's how my personal feel about it went, and that led to the subsequent sort of panic hire / promotion of Pascal Vincent, who was also given a 2-year contract as head coach before the season as well. And at first, I felt like the Pascal Vincent thing started off a bit smoothly this year, where, you did have Kent Johnson getting sent down and healthy scratch. That was met with a bit of some side-eyeing, but honestly, I do think that Kent Johnson stuff worked out, where he came back and he looked a lot more focused and better than he was looking in training camp and in preseason. I felt like he did come back with a bit more of a purpose. But honestly, as the season has gone further along, the Jackets' lack of on-ice success really does make this look like Pascal Vincent being the head coach is sort of the move of a front office that they're just kind of flailing their arms around at this point, where the Blue Jackets have really been unable to close out games. Playing with a lead has been a constant struggle for them. The third period has been absolutely abysmal for the Blue Jackets all of this year, and that's what makes this year a little bit even more frustrating in some ways than last season, where last season's team, they just flat out stunk, right? Not only were they bad, they were also hurt and bad. So the result of them finishing second to last overall in the standings was a bit expected, where with this team, we've seen flashes of competitiveness with everyone that the Jackets play for periods of time in the game, but over and over and over again, we see this team constantly collapse at the worst possible moments. And that's fine for a young team at the beginning of the season when they're still learning to gel with each other, new coach who's brought in under bad circumstances just before training camp. Some hiccups are to be expected, but when Pascal Vincent has to go up there every single post game and say, yeah, we're learning, and after 10 times of learning the same lesson over and over again, you would hope that something would stick either with the players or with the coaching staff or vice versa, but it feels like none of it is working out at all. And, that has led to some questions in how the guys are being deployed as well with some of the youth in general. And I feel like that's where we get to the situation with Elvis Merzlikins, where before the year started, his improvement was seen to be vital for the Jackets' success this year, where if Columbus is going to take a step forward, they're going to have to get better goaltending play. And honestly, Elvis Merzlikins has improved this year. I think he's been their best goaltender that they've consistently had at the NHL level this season. His numbers are better than Tarasov's or Spencer Martin's. Jet Greaves has had a couple very good games in the NHL, but he's very young. They want to keep him down at the AHL level so far, at least for this season. But honestly, Elvis Merzlikins did not have a high bar to clear after his terrible play last season as far as improvement goes. Also, Merzlikins' antics can be a bit divisive as well, highlighted by an incident that he had with Tom Wilson in overtime, I believe back in December, where the Jackets had a 3-2 breakout opportunity in overtime until Elvis Merzlikins put the Capitals on the power play after just going ham on Tom Wilson in his own net, where the Blue Jackets would eventually lose in that overtime on that Capitals power play. He did play in a couple games after that, and I do feel like the impact of that was a little bit overblown, where both sides have kind of said that anything moving forward wasn't really impacted by what Elvis did with Tom Wilson in that game. But I think what wasn't overblown was his absences for the next couple of weeks, where when the Blue Jackets were still carrying 3 goaltenders, Merzlikins would find himself the healthy scratch quite often in late December and in early January, to the point where even the local media, which is usually pretty soft on some of these guys, even they were starting to kind of raise their eyebrows and question what's going on with Elvis Merzlikins. Why aren't we seeing him in these games? I know you want to see what you're having to Neil Tarasov after he came back from injury, but you have to really just put Elvis Merzlikins in the press box in order for that to happen. And that led to media talks from both Pascal Vincent and the front office, and from Elvis Merzlikins himself, where, Pascal Vincent and Jarmo Kekalainen, they seem to have had a bit of like a conflicting messaging, where, Jarmo says, hey, this is more of a coaching decision. Pascal Vincent kind of pushes this on the organization, saying that, if they agree to a new scenario, it's above my pay grade. Where, look, if you're going to have a narrative that isn't exactly true to the media, I get why, especially when it involves possibly trading one of your players. You don't want to create a circus that you don't want, but at least have a consistent story to where the front office and the coaches aren't saying different things. That's not a good look. And then Elvis Merzlikins, he basically comes out and spills the beans, saying that they've agreed to a new scenario. But at first, it's clarified that, Elvis Merzlikins hasn't officially requested a trade, just that a new scenario has been agreed to, whatever that means. Then, after Elvis plays, after a shootout win over Vancouver, Merzlikins says in a radio interview that he did request a trade, but Elvis Merzlikins' agent said that he misspoke, which I guess there's some wiggle room there with English not being Merzlikins' first language. But, saying that you asked for a trade is much different than saying you just asked for a new scenario and clarified that, no trade request has been made. So whatever Elvis Merzlikins meant, whether he has said to the team, I want to go somewhere else, or he's just open to the idea of getting a change of scenery, it's clear that him and the front office are at least willing to entertain the idea of moving on for each other. But I do feel like there were ways to go about that. You could evaluate Daniil Tarasov without actively pissing off your best goaltender, right? Where I think you can even feel out the trade market for Elvis Merzlikins without pushing his buttons and making him constant, healthy scratches. And, sort of in the latest round of what are we doing here, Adam Fantilli has been moved to the wing with the return of Boone Jenner, which I don't think is that big of a deal if it's temporary. However, if it's 10 straight games of Adam Fantilli not playing center, his natural position, where you drafted him to be your future face of the franchise at the center position, then I do think that is a bit of an issue of why are we not taking our development of these guys more seriously, especially in a season where the Blue Jackets aren't going to be pushing for the playoffs. The actual win-loss results have lost almost all of its meaning. You might as well try to get Adam Fantilli as many reps at the center as you possibly can. More concerning, in my opinion, is David Jiricek and his constant healthy scratching lately. He was actually sent down to the Monsters over this past weekend. I feel like David Jiricek, there is no reason he should not be playing on the top four of this team, especially when you have guys like Andrew Peeke out there constantly stinking it up. I'm guessing that's a call for management as well, because they've wanted to move Andrew Peeke and his contract this entire year and haven't been able to do it. Because honestly, if you want to increase Andrew Peeke's value, playing him on the ice is not going to be helping. I feel like Andrew Peeke, the mystery box, is a lot more valuable than Andrew Peeke, the defenseman, at this point. And you have Eric Branson, who, again, he's had some better play this year. I feel like this year's been better than last year, but he's still doing things like he's still shoving guys into our already pissed off goaltender. You saw that against the Oilers yesterday. David Jiricek, I feel like he could definitely use some of the ice time at the NHL level that is given to guys like Andrew Peeke, like Jiricek. And you know what? Also on the right side of the defense, also Damon Severson, who hasn't been, I don't feel like he's been maybe as bad as some Blue Jackets fans might tell you, but I don't think that contract is looking like it's going to age very well in years 6, 7, 8 of that deal. But yeah, this front office is definitely under a lot of scrutiny, well-deserved scrutiny, and honestly, unless there's some miracle run from the Blue Jackets that gets them barely into the playoffs, I see no way in which they aren't fired at the end of the season. But that's just me. Maybe ownership, who has been pretty much radio silent about this for the whole season. Maybe they just keep the status quo and they just keep on chugging along until Jarmo and JD's contracts run out. Honestly, at this point, nothing would surprise me from this ownership group or from this front office or this coaching staff or anything. If they do something bad, it's not shocking anymore. It's just kind of like, well, I guess they just decided to make it more interestingly bad for the Blue Jackets. But that's going to do it for me in this video. Thank you for watching. If you did make it this far through this 14-minute ramble, thank you for watching. If you did make it this far, leave a like and a subscribe if you enjoyed the video and you'd like to see more like it. Once again, thank you for watching. I will see you at the next one.